I want you to stop calling this structure the Adam's apple. Hello, Renée Yoxon, trans voice teacher here. And today I want to talk about how you as a voice professional, a singing teacher, a choir director, an acting teacher can work to make your teaching environment more welcoming for your trans students with a series I'm calling Degendering the Voice, otherwise known as Biological Essentialism Makes Fools of Us All. And today, I want you to stop calling this structure the Adam's apple. Let's just strike the phrase Adam's apple from our lexicon as teachers, shall we? And the reason is it's an unnecessarily gendered term. Everybody has the bony structure in their neck. Some people, you can see it more prominently, and we usually refer to that as an Adam's apple. But anyone can have a prominent bony structure here, whether they have undergone a testosterone puberty or not. Some people, if they're thinner, you might see it more than if they have more adipose tissue in their neck. There's lots of reasons why you may or may not see this structure. But the point is, let's get rid of the term Adam's apple, and we're going to replace it with the term thyroid notch. Okay, the thyroid notch. This refers to the pointy part in the thyroid cartilage. So not only is the term gender neutral, it's actually more specific, more correct. And that's your tip for the day. Transvocal exploration has been unexpectedly healing. Creating the little craft for my name and giving myself some love with the warm-up has opened my eyes to myself. I'm very excited about what's to come. I have already experienced a greater awareness of myself and the way I use my voice every day. Transvocal exploration turns 1 year old today. Happy birthday. Back in December of 2020, I quit my job so that I could focus entirely on voice teaching. And at the time I was teaching like singing, songwriting, music theory, musicianship. But between January of 2021 and May, interest in my trans voice lessons really took off. In May of 2021, I joined TikTok, made my very first TikTok. It went wildly viral so quickly, and interest in my lessons exploded. And I quickly realized that I would never be able to meet the demand of one-on-one private lessons. And I really didn't want there to be like a waiting list for my services because trans people deal with waiting lists enough. So up to that point, I had been really like averse to making an online course because I believed that my value as a teacher rested solely upon my ability to help individual students. However, that year I had given like 30 workshops and there were so many people who just wanted to like get the information in private and then go work on it on their own. And I still got lots of really positive feedback. So with all that experience, I poured everything I knew into my very first online course, Transvocal Exploration, and the feedback has been absolutely wonderful. I wanted to share with you some testimonials that some students have left me over the past year. I had so many aha moments during transvocal exploration, learning about the importance of resonance, visualizing the parts of the vocal tract as I speak, thinking about an inflection and listening for the drop. Since beginning the course, I have been able to maintain target resonance more consistently as it's easier to move the muscles physically in the correct way. I've been enjoying transvocal exploration. I thought I was getting a voice lesson only, but it came with a side of yoga. I seriously love the stretching and warm-ups. Having a good routine helps me a lot. It's nice to have all the structure involved so far, and I remind myself that even though I may not be close to my target voice yet, all the work adds up. Transvocal exploration helped me to understand resonance and see how much of an impact it has compared to pitch. It gave me hope to be able to have variation and still pass. I love the actual working tips and the help with the mentality. We've all heard you don't need to transition to be trans, but I'd like to introduce you to you don't need to be trans to transition. So I get a lot of comments like this one that says, I'm not trans, just want a masculine voice. Is that okay? And I'm here to say, yes, it's great. If you want to change your voice or experiment with your gender in any way, for any reason, that's fine. That is the privilege of being an autonomous human. You can dress how you want. You can wear the kind of makeup you want. You can change your hair however you want. You can have whatever surgeries you want. And you can be cis or trans or neither. There are no rules.
No rules, just right.
Being a human, this is the only reason why it rules. It's because you're allowed to do anything you want and experiment in any way that you want. Okay, so with all that said, let me just go over a few reasons why some people might want to work on voice alteration outside of trans reasons. So you can work on voice alteration for voice acting, for LARPing, for D&D, for spicy role play.
That's a spicy meatball.
Just to have some more options, just to see if something fits better, for fun, for silliness, for joy.
Joy's the name.
There are tons and tons of reasons to work on modifying your voice. And just because you're getting this content from me and I'm targeting trans people, doesn't mean that I mean to exclude you. If you're cis and you want to work on voice alteration, you are welcome here. So welcome. This question about voice masculinization says, is it even worth doing this pre-T? I've done everything, gotten my voice into the higher male range on voice tools, and it still doesn't pass as cis. So I have two things I want to say about this. First, I want to throw voice tools into a fire. No, that's not fair. I think that, the apps that we use to monitor the levels of our voice, they're really useful in certain circumstances, but I very frequently just see them making trans people feel bad about their voice, and passing is super context specific. There are studies coming out right now that show that how a person's voice is perceived is heavily dependent on what the person listening is also seeing. So how you're dressed and other, things that we attach to gender. So passing, it's a quagmire, and if you hang your worth on it, it's a slippery slope to self-loathing. So I want you to be careful with that. Now, to answer the question, is it worth doing voice masculinization exercises pre-T? I would say absolutely. A lot of people seek out voice masculinization exercises after they've started taking T because you have to learn how to acclimatize to your new voice. Any work that you can do to gain control over your voice is going to be a net positive for you, whether you're starting before taking T or after. I hope this helps. So you've been working on your target voice alone at home and you feel like you're ready to get out into the real world, but as soon as you open your mouth around your friends and family, it's like you forget how to make your target voice. You forget everything you've learned about trans voice alteration. How do we make that leap? So today I want to talk about some low stakes micro conversations that you can use to practice out in the real world with real people. Number one, when you're out shopping and talking to a cashier, that's a really good time to practice saying things like thank you, or I have a bag, or I'll pay by card. It's like a short 3-second conversation that you can use to practice your target voice. Number two is your coffee order. You very likely go out and get coffee pretty frequently and say maybe the same thing. I'll have an iced coffee. I'll have an iced coffee. So if that's something that's on your list of common daily phrases, that is a perfect time to practice your target voice. Number three is anything you can order over the phone. So if you normally would order your pizza online, you can try and call your favorite pizza place in order to place the order with a real human being. Along that same line, number four is you can call for information. So if you need to know when something is open, for instance, like a store that you would normally visit, you can usually call that store to find out their opening hours, or you can call, here in Montreal, we have like an 811 service for medical information. There's lots of like phone services, which are a good place to practice your target voice. Along that line as well, what are we at now? Number 5 or 6? Somebody suggested this to me. You can use scam callers. So if a scam caller calls you and you identify them as a scam and you have the time and you feel like wasting their time, that could be an opportunity to practice your target voice. Of course, your mileage may vary. Please use all caution with this tip. And lastly, gaming. So this is a really popular place to practice the target voice because, of course, you're using an avatar and there's a voice-only component to it. Do you have any suggestions for low-stakes micro-conversation practice? Leave them in the comments below. Hello and welcome to the second installment of Degendering the Voice, otherwise known as Biological Essentialism Makes Fools of Us All. And today I am specifically talking to the choir directors, the singing teachers, people who work with the particular genre of music where we have voice types like alto, tenor, bass, soprano, that kind of thing. I implore you to please stop referring to voice types as women and men. Okay, like if you've been in a choir and you're trans, you know this experience where the choir director is like, okay, now I want the women to do this or the men to do this. This is a perfect example of biological essentialism making a fool of us all, because there is no faster way to be incorrect in your speech than by saying this. It is so much easier just to say upper voices do this, lower voices do this, or if you need a specific section, just say that. I would like the altos to do this, I'd like the sopranos to do this. So the reason why this is really important is because there are people of all genders, both cis and trans, in every voice type. This is not uncommon. It has been going on forever. There are cis women tenors. There are cis men altos. There are trans men and women and non-binary people. There's all genders in all voice types. So I implore you, please just say what you mean. Please just refer to the people that you want to speak to, upper voices, lower voices. It's much easier and much more correct than saying men and women. And that has been your tip for the day. For my next couple of videos, I want to talk about the reasons why people resist starting a trans voice practice. So there's a little bit of a psychological hurdle that can impede the beginning of a practice, and there are very simple ways to get over that. So today I want to talk about the bounds of silliness. I often hear from students who are especially just starting out that a voice practice is very silly. And singers say this to me too. It is objectively a silly thing to practice, but it can be really hard if you have no experience being silly, or if being silly makes you feel like deep shame or embarrassment. It can be very challenging to get over that so that you can have productive practice. So I want to talk about a few safe ways to grow the bounds of silliness in your life. The first thing is to read books or plays out loud. So it's especially good if you can read books to children, because it's kind of expected for you to make a silly voice. But even if you're alone, reading books out loud and trying to act it out a little bit can just be a way to feel more comfortable with being silly. So the next way is speaking through your pet. So if you have a cat or a dog or a fish or a lizard, if you make a silly voice for your pet, like many people do naturally when they're talking to their animal, this is like a really sweet and innocent way to increase the bounds of silliness in your life. And if you're feeling really spicy, you can maybe get some puppets. So puppets are another fun way to increase the bounds of silliness. You know, you're not just being silly, you have a puppet and it's being silly. So those are 3 ways you can increase the bounds of silliness in your life. Do you have any suggestions? Please leave them in the comments. So this week, I'm talking about hurdles that come up when we're trying to start a trans voice practice. So I said in my last video that some people resist starting a trans voice practice because they're averse to silliness. It's too silly of a practice and it makes them feel shame or embarrassment. But today, I want to talk a little bit about the internal judgment that comes up when we first start a trans voice practice. So this is something I hear all the time. People start practicing and right away their practice is connected to these feelings of self-worth. Like, I'm not good enough, my voice isn't feminine enough or masculine enough or neutral enough or whatever. There's this feeling of not being enough. So what I usually advise to students in this position is to just start with judgment-free warming up. So these are just exercises that have nothing to do with like altering the perceived gender of your voice. They're just meant to give you a sense of control over your voice and give your voice a little more freedom and flexibility. So this can help to separate the judgment from the practice. You're not trying to be anything. All you're doing is showing up, doing a little stretch, a little yawn, a few glisses, a 5-minute warm up, and that's it. And if you can manage to do that every day or, a couple times a week, this can help to tell your brain, I am a voice practitioner. I work on my voice. And then when you transition into more trans voice alteration exercises, it's not quite so jarring for your brain because you're already used to being a voice practitioner. I hope this helps. This week, I'm talking about overcoming the hurdles that we face when starting a trans voice practice. So you can see in my last 2 videos, I talked about overcoming fear of being silly and fear of judgment that comes up when we first start practicing. And today, I wanted to talk about positive practice triggers. So this is really important because a lot of times when we start practicing, The sound of the voice or any engagement with the voice at all is connected to dysphoria, judgment, fear, all these negative things. And so in your brain, there's a connection. Working on the voice is connected to dysphoria, judgment, and fear, things that are negative. So that can really impede your practice because obviously you're not going to want to show up for your practice if it's connected to those negative emotions. So something that can help you overcome that is to create positive practice triggers. And this is something that one of my students told me actually, and it really worked well for her. So something that she did was she always practiced at the same time as she did her makeup in the morning. So for her, doing her makeup was something that was connected to deep gender euphoria. It was something she loved to do. And so every time she sat down to do that, she was connecting euphoria to her voice practice. And this can be a really positive way to think positively about your voice practice. So in the comments, what could you connect your voice practice to that would give you gender euphoria? What would be your positive practice trigger? Let me know. This commenter on TikTok says, so you know how T voice is something that is audible to other queer people? Could you explain what the features of that voice are? The T voice that this commenter is referring to is the voice that some people get as a result of taking testosterone. This is a bit of a misnomer because literally every voice that has been altered by testosterone could be considered a T voice. But what this commenter is referring to is the voice that is unique to some trans men and trans masculine folks who take testosterone. This voice is characterized by a thick vocal fold mass, which you can sometimes hear as a buzziness, a slight drop in pitch from that person's baseline, and a relatively bright resonance. It might sound something like this. This type of voice is more likely to result if a person starts testosterone later in life, like 30 plus, because later in life, it's more likely that the cartilage of the larynx will have ossified, which means it can't grow with testosterone and create more space for vocal folds to vibrate and more space for resonance. This can limit how deep the pitch of the voice can drop and also how dark the voice can sound. But in addition to this, older folks will have more ingrained vocal habits, which means that they're more likely to maintain the height of their larynx instead of letting it drop to create a darker resonance while speaking, because that's likely how they've always spoken all of their life and that's what's comfortable for them. I want to highlight that I said more likely because this is not always the case, and I've definitely seen people in their 30s and 40s who didn't get the T voice. But I also want to add that this type of voice is by no means a negative thing. In fact, I have had many students intentionally wait to start taking T because they wanted to sound clockably trans, because being trans is super cool. But if you don't like this for yourself, check out my masculinizing playlist for tips on darkening resonance, because those things will have an appreciable effect on that sound of voice. I hope this helps. This commenter says, wait, you can be cis or trans or neither? How does neither work? Isn't it an either or thing? So I am no expert on the philosophy of gender, so this is simply my understanding of things, but my working definition of a transgender person is someone who identifies as a gender other than the one that they were assigned at birth. However, I also believe that being trans is a label that someone needs to self-identify as. So I would never call someone trans unless I knew that they identified that way. So with those ideas in mind, I can think of several cases of folks who may not identify as either cis or trans. So number one is some non-binary people. A lot of non-binary people don't identify as the gender they were assigned at birth, but they also don't identify with the word transgender. For instance, I came out as non-binary about 10 years ago, but I didn't start using the word trans for myself until a few years later. I would argue that in those early years, I was neither cis nor trans. Number two, if a person is questioning their gender, they might not identify as cis or trans. The liminal state of questioning can last a really long time or forever, and that's great and fine. So people who are questioning might spend their whole lives not identifying as cis or trans, and that's totally fine. So number three are children who are not assigned a gender at birth. It's becoming more common for parents to not gender their child until they're old enough to tell them what they want. And when that child chooses, will they become cis or trans? Will they only be cis if they choose non-binary and because they were raised that way, and trans if they choose a binary gender? Maybe the concepts of cis and trans will become outdated if this practice becomes more popular. So as different people arise with their different experiences, these are realities that we can include in our understanding of gender.